My name is Eric Geyer, and I'm the Director of Jackson County Community Justice, and I am the Chair of the Alcohol and Drug Planning Committee. And Sarah Smith also is Vice Chair of this meeting, so we get to help put together the agenda with Stacy Brubaker, and we're very lucky today that we have Dr. Darryl Inaba joining us. Dr. Inaba, I first met you, I want to say 15, 16 years ago, not to date that, but I had dinner with Eric Martin and you, not to name drop, up in Portland. And the topic of discussion was, what do you think about this buprenorphine stuff? And it was at that point, so however long that dates it back. But I remember, it immediately went to the data and the science and the idea that it could help people. And so we're so lucky to have you today and here to speak particularly around methamphetamine. But thank you for being willing to be here. And the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the hard work you guys do getting together. And it's wonderful to see many people I haven't been able to see in the last 3 years because of this crazy pandemic happening. But it's great to get together with you and probably share what you already know, but hopefully bring some focus to the current methamphetamine issue. I always have to do some disclosures. I'm with Dominion Diagnostics out of Rhode Island, a diagnostic firm, and I do work in their scientific advisory board. Their board, I'm with CNS Productions, a principal with that. And for over 50 years, I've been an editor on the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs. So those are my disclosures, just in case I mention anything that confronts. But it's great that LADPC recognizes that we're actually having a spike now in both the pandemic and now the influenza is spreading. And so keeping this virtual is great. Everybody's getting really relaxed and getting all else together and just seeing a continued spread. So great that you're making sure we're keeping each other safe. Thank you, everybody, for all the clinical work you're doing and all the services you're doing for this county. It's really courageous during this time, but I just want to stress from my point of view, too, that I always want all of our staff to be as safe as they can and take as many measures they can to protect themselves and to protect our clients, especially them. But it's a time when it's hard to get people to cover, and we have staff that have to go out because of illness and stuff like that. We can't take in clients. So I really want them to really take hard at keeping themselves, doing everything they can to keep safe. A few years ago, I was presenting that everyone was talking about an opioid epidemic, but we are actually having a drug abuse epidemic, as all drugs are having problems. Strange that right at this moment, we might be actually going back to a major opioid epidemic for other reasons, and I'll present that. But I'm sure you know that during these 3 years that we've been in the pandemic, there's been increased overdose deaths in every category: opioids, cocaine, and stimulant drugs. Even have benzodiazepine overdoses, which are extremely safe drugs, but when they're mixed with opiates and other drugs, they become very toxic. We're also seeing continual increase in alcohol poisonings and alcohol deaths, and a disproportionate representation of those deaths, more so among women than we've had before. So we're really in the midst of a major drug epidemic. I have several slides, a lot more slides that I'm going to have a chance to go over in the next 30 minutes. But basically, so just let you know that there are slides to document the increased cocaine overdose deaths, increased stimulant overdose deaths that you're interested in, provisional CDC data related that we've had as of April over 30,000 psychostimulant OD deaths other than cocaine, largely due to meth. And between 2000 and 2021, we have a 500% increase of stimulant other than cocaine overdose deaths. Part of this due to the rediscovery on the street that the combination of depressants and stimulants actually offer a much better feeling and much better high than they get from either drug alone. And that was called speedballing. And that dates back, as you know, John Belushi died of it, but date back to actually Sigmund Freud and his friend were into the speedball situation. But we're seeing that basically speedballing has come back. And when we look at the cocaine deaths involved opioids, 54% of meth deaths had opioids in them, 75% of cocaine had opioids in them. Also, cocaine deaths related deaths. The numbers are just drastic, and you can look them up at your own here to see how much they've increased. In addition to intentional speedballing, there is also an unintentional speedball, and that's why I'm saying I think we're now returning back to the major opioid epidemic. Basically, every street drug is now shown to be sort of spike with fentanyl. Fentanyl has become the go-to drug in this county as well as the rest of the United States. Fentanyl, as you know, is so many different designer types of fentanyl, much more powerful than all the other opiates or anything else we've had before. Indications are it's much more addicting. And so I actually have clients now at ARC who were meth users who got spiked. Their meth was spiked with fentanyl. Now they became addicted to fentanyl. We're seeing a lot of that. Fentanyl has been found in meth, marijuana, psychedelics, fake prescription benzos and opioids, and is increasingly put into drugs that people don't even know they're getting, and they get addicted to it. Fentanyl-laced drugs, there's actually a laboratory, a Millennia Laboratory, who's now collecting street drugs and looking to see what's in those street drugs. And they're finding that fentanyl is positive in a lot of other samples. In Oregon here, they found that 48.7, almost 50% of all the heroines they analyze out of Oregon have fentanyl in it. 24, almost 25% of all meth samples they analyze have fentanyl in it, and 21% of cocaine have fentanyl in it. On the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California, 63% of heroin had fentanyl in it. East Coast, some of the states in the East Coast have 100% of their heroin have fentanyl in it. And in mountain and central, it ranges from 48 to 98%. So we're actually seeing just an increase in opiate abuse because fentanyl is now laced in almost all street drugs. As you might have heard, basically last year has the highest overdose death rate that we've ever recorded in this nation. Over 108,000 overdose deaths, of which 32,000, almost 33,000 were from psychostimulants, primary methamphetamine. Increased benzo deaths because it's being used with heroin and other depressants and alcohol, and increased alcohol. The National Survey on Drug Use and Health that looks at a bunch of measures to rate to where each state is it takes them about 2 years to analyze all the data they get in. So the most recent report is on 2020. And in that year, 2020, that was released at the end of 2021, turns out that Oregon is the number one. We have the number one methamphetamine abuse per capita of all the states in the United States. Also, we're number one for prescription drug misuse of all the other states in the United States. We're number two for overall addiction rates per capita in all the other states in the country. We're number two for marijuana use, number 7 for cocaine use, number 11 for heroin use. But what I'm seeing now at our clinic and others, hearing from others, I think we're going to move up in that heroin laced with fentanyl up farther and farther in state priorities or hierarchy. What's real sad, and I think what your real task is to look at the fact that although we have all this problem, we have continued been up there in terms of drug abuse in the state of Oregon. We, in 2020, placed absolutely last. We're the state with the lowest access to addiction treatment of every other state in the nation. And I think that's a real problem that we've got to solve, and we've got to get treatment access. We've got to get treatment opportunities for people to get substance abuse care. This graph showed that in 1919 to 2020, we had 93,000. Again, we have now 108,000 people have died from drug overdoses. And when we looked at Oregon was overdose deaths increased by 29%. Jackson County, we increased by 30%. Nationally, the overdose was 29%. Oregon increased 30% by 30%. Jackson County here, our overdose rate increased 36%. And I just point this out that, we got great concern over major health issues, major public safety issues. We had peak auto accidents auto accident deaths peaked out at 54,000 deaths in 1972 before all the speed law changes and really cracked down on that, make a difference. The HIV/AIDS deaths peaked out to 46,000 deaths in 1995 before we really put a lot of effort into addressing that health crisis. And although we had these terrible tragedies happening now with gun deaths, we actually peaked out in gun deaths in 2017. Maybe we'll go higher than that now, but with 39,000. But they were peaked out and they stimulated a lot of reaction. We're up here with overdose deaths, and still we aren't able to get people into treatment or have treatment access. And I think that is a real problem. Meth and psychostimulants, according to HIDA and other reports that I've been reading, are the leading cause of overdose drug deaths in Oregon 2016 to 2018. And I have the rates there per 100,000 on the death rates that are going on. And strangely, year to date at the ARC, methamphetamine ranks as third. It's the third most common primary drug abuse that people are admitted for treatment, behind alcohol and behind opiates. And that might be the way we're doing intakes or what our treatment services are, but I'm not sure why we rank meth always comes in. It's been chronically coming in as the third most common primary drug abuse, and when it's the most abused drug in Oregon. However, when we ask for secondary and tertiary drugs abuse, methamphetamine ranks first as the most common secondary drug abuse. So it's out there with all the things we're seeing. I don't know if you've ever heard of HIDA, but HIDA, there are special places in the United States that are designated by criminal justice system to have high intensity drug trafficking task force really monitor and track and try and intervene with what's happening. So the latest Oregon Idaho HIDA report, the threat assessment summary in 2022, states that methamphetamine availability and trafficking continues to occur at high levels in Oregon and Idaho, followed and remain as our area's greatest drug threat, followed by heroin, fentanyl, synthetic opioids. They are starting to look at the fentanyl thing situation as well, and they're increasing the dual problem of methamphetamine and opioid-based drugs is coming in. And the real problem I have as a treatment provider is the need to have people and everybody understand that addiction is a treatable and preventable chronic persistent medical disorders. Actually, all the research on treatment outcomes for treating addiction, when you compare it with other chronic persistent disorders like treating hypertension or diabetes or depression or panic disorder or anything, we get just as good results, even with the results we're getting now in terms of positive outcomes and long-term life changes from treating addicts than we do getting treating diabetes or hypertension. Yet we continue to have the least access to treatment for people suffering for substance-related and addictive disorders. And the real crime here is this is a real old slide, but I should make a new slide, but real crime is it's so cheap. It's a lot cheaper to treat addiction than it is to not treat addiction, and yet we aren't able to provide treatment on demand or treatment when a person needs it, could access it right away. To understand this better, and I'm supposed to explain somewhat more about how methamphetamine works, is that there are certain drugs that affect the brain, change the way a person thinks, change the way they feel, change the way they see the world around them. Those are psychoactive drugs. And they're basically stimulants, depressants, or psychedelic drugs are psychoactive drugs. Not all of those drugs that can affect the brain are addictive. The drugs that affect the brain and created to be addicted in humans are the same drugs that created in all mammals because they affect the unconscious. Addiction starts in the unconscious, very primitive parts of our brain. And every mammal gets addicted to the same drugs that human beings get addicted to. And the drugs that are psychoactive that create addiction are what we call reinforcing drugs. You have a positive reinforcement, which I interpret really is a hijacking of a survival mechanism. Addiction in that person who's vulnerable hijacks their survival instincts. And that's why addiction is so powerful. And that leads, as you continue and you get the the addictive process is happening, that then turns to also negative reinforcement, meaning that your physiology, your body's changed to such an extent that if you try and stop taking that drug, you get negative body reactions that reinforce you continuing to use the drug. So those are the addictive drugs, and not all psychoactive drugs do that. Again, despite a wide range of drugs that can affect the brain and make you think differently, whatever, if you break it down and analyze it, basically it comes down to a simple thing. You have some drugs that make you more excited, more awake, more motivated, more confident, make you feel sexy, involve you in the world around you. And those are what we're talking about today: methamphetamine, cocaine, Concerta, Ritalin, all the psychostimulants. And there's a lot of psychostimulants I had included in this talk we won't get to, but there's a lot of them that are now hitting the street, illicit psychostimulants that are out there. And then you have other drugs that make you sleepy or drowsy or numb your senses and cut down your response to the world around you. And those are the depressants. Those are the downer drugs, drugs like heroin, drugs like alcohol, drugs like fentanyl, and many benzodiazepines and sedatives. And the only other way the brain could be altered is by creating the psychedelic effect, hallucinations, deliriums, things like that, that we call the psychedelic drugs. Those are the only way they affect drug. And there is a wide range, wide classes of drugs that do that. My friend Dr. Kevin McCauley has even proposed that we establish a periodic table of intoxicants, how these drugs line up and how they affect the body and how they affect addiction. So basically, these drugs can only affect the brain because your brain is a pharmacy. Your brain cells don't touch each other. They don't touch any other kind of cells at all. No nerve cell touches another nerve cell. They communicate by creating, from the food you eat, chemicals we call neurotransmitters that are released from an axon or one brain cell hair that then affects the brain cell hair adjacent to it, called a dendrite, and you get a synapse, or you get a communication between brain cells. And the only reason why these drugs that might come out of, in this case, totally synthetic methamphetamine was first synthesized in Japan, amphetamine synthesized in Germany, way back in the early 1900s, and they were totally synthetic. They kind of copy ephedrine and other things in nature, but they're totally synthetic. But the only reason they can affect your brain is because they happen to interact with or are mistaken as your natural brain chemistry. So that's a basis of how all drugs work. Brain cells communicate through this synaptic process where we can actually do electron microscopes. This is a monoaxonal brain cell. This is actual synapse in occurrence. This is one brain cell talking to another brain cell. We see that process. They don't touch each other, but they come very close. And where they become close, right in this space here, that's where that chemical is being released from synaptic vesicles, these blue things. They float into this space. They attach to receptor sites on the dendrites, and they cause that communication to happen. And every drug works that way through this synaptic process where these chemicals that are neurotransmitters depicted by triangles in my diagram here, they're released in this space and they slot in, they actually weave molecularly into receptor sites to create flows of different ion and create an action potential or synapse to occur. So basically, drugs only mimic, modify, or disrupt or block natural brain chemicals. And the uppers, methamphetamine, work by affecting your own catecholamines. They affect your own natural brain stimulants. Heroin affects your own natural opiates in your brain. Alcohol, the GABA, your own natural sedative in your brain. Serotonin psychedelics primarily work through serotonin and a bunch of other neurochemicals. But we've identified up to 300 different neurochemicals that the brain makes from the food you eat. And every time we find a new drug that somebody's taking, we get curious to see if it's going to turn us on to finding a new neurotransmitters. But these are some examples of your brain natural chemicals. Here's the important thing about cocaine and methamphetamine. The way they work at the synapse is they actually cause your brain to release its natural brain stimulants. For the most part, people who use these drugs to feel the effects they are seeking are getting high or feeling the effects that they can feel without ever taking that drug. Your brain already has that capacity. What happens is cocaine and methamphetamine will cause your brain to release its natural brain stimulants that then stimulate the dendrite of the adjacent synapse and cause a person to experience feeling awake, alert, more motivated. As soon as the stimulation or the synapse occurred, these neurotransmitters are sucked right back up to reuptake portals and are stored or recycled so that you can use them again, because you can only make so much from the food you eat every day. Why these drugs can affect you in an addictive, in a negative way, is cocaine and methamphetamine will block some of that recycling basis. And so every time you use, you're depleting your brain of its natural stimulatory chemicals, making you take more and more methamphetamine to try and feel the same effects. Methamphetamine also works directly on the postsynaptic, and methamphetamine blocks the breakdown of these neurochemical, these enzymes that break down your natural chemicals. So you're actually getting sort of a enhancement of that stimulatory effect. But the key issue that I try and make clients understand is they're actually feeling their own ability to feel awake, excited, motivated, and confident. And what they need to do is gain recovery, rebalance their brain chemistry, and then they can pay attention to when life causes them to have that same feeling without ever having to take drugs. And that's getting long-term recovery in people. In every addiction, though, there's only about 5 different brain chemicals involved. Methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, whatever drug is affected, they all work by causing a depletion of a chemical that your brain makes called dopamine. Dopamine has a lot of purposes and works on many different effects in the brain, but this is the main chemical that operates or turns on the instinctive unconscious survival mechanism. In the brain, it's a place we call the nucleus accumbens, but any drug that releases dopamine has this potential for addiction. You get dopamine release with every survival process. We measure how much dopamine is released when you're hungry and you eat food. They're telling you need to eat to survive. When you have sex, if you don't procreate, you have extinction of your species. We measure dopamine release there. And then with every drug that's addicting, marijuana, everybody should know it has an addictive liability. Amphetamine releases that much dopamine, cocaine, nicotine, morphine, every addictive drug releases dopamine, and the addiction is then brought about by causing a depletion. This is dopamine in the red, in this very primitive part of the brain called the limbic system. And with alcohol or every other drug, you're going to see the brain gets depleted of dopamine. So it's a hijacking of the survival mechanism that we're talking about. We have every drug that does that. Another drug that's involved with every addiction is your own opiates, your own endorphins and kephalins. This is a new process we've identified called incentive saliency. In that unconscious part of your brain, you have your hypothalamus that once you get that action going with dopamine, that part of the brain also releases your own endorphins and kephalins and just creates a little bit of a twinge so that you like cocaine or you like methamphetamine, you want methamphetamine, but when that endorphins kick in to create incentive saliency, it changes that to you got to do it. You must do it. Your life depends upon it. That's why addiction becomes so powerful in those who are sensitive. Norepinephrine that is released by methamphetamine is also affected, and this is a major chemical that's released in the only behavioral addiction that's recognized right now in medicine, pathological gambling. And gambling does the same thing as methamphetamine will do and cocaine will do. It messes with your adrenaline, noradrenaline, and your catecholamines to bring about those imbalances. GABA and glutamate, your own inhibitory, excitatory brain chemicals were always suspected, but it's been confirmed that they are also involved with every addiction. I still believe that serotonin, although not confirmed, I think there's more studies saying that basically serotonin is going to be involved with why there are normies. Most people who take a drug like alcohol will not become addicted to alcohol. Only about 15% of people who drink alcohol will meet medical diagnostic criteria for alcohol use disorder sometime in their life. And I think they're going to find a difference with serotonin in the normies that the person prone to addiction will not have with all addictions. So we know these pathways, we know how this works. And what we're faced with currently is we're faced with a whole bunch of changes, a whole bunch of differences in classic drugs of abuse that we've had around for a while. So They've got basically uppers, downers, all arounders, and every upper, such as methamphetamine, is going to work through your catecholamines, these chemicals your brain makes by itself. And to understand these changes that are happening, you have to understand the process of designer drugs or club drugs. And it's a modification in my field, we call it pharmacophore, where we just modify the molecule a little bit to create a new drug that has a greater effect or has less side effects, a new drug that you can't test in the urinalysis for until we develop a test for it, a new drug that's actually legal until we pass a specific law that makes it legal. And that's what the street chemists are doing right now. Simple explanation, amyl nitrite is a prescription drug, but the street made isobutyl nitrite merely by taking off one carbon. So you get the same effect, same everything, but this is a totally non-prescription drug, totally legal drug, and sold in head stores and stuff as poppers and things like that. Well, once you can do that, then you get other chemists who can modify it in many ways. And that's what we're seeing with fentanyl right now. Hundreds of different modifications, even new chemicals that aren't even fentanyl are being modified and are now new opiates that are hitting the street. So this is a scene that street chemists has become sophisticated with. So we have all these new designer drugs. We have THC, the active molecule produced in marijuana. We have synthetic marijuana. We have, of course, methamphetamine and a lot of meth drugs. Now we have cathinone. Cathinone is a chemical that's produced by a plant, but they have many different derivatives of it to produce drugs that can stimulate you and are legal and not controlled by laws. Mescaline, psychedelic, you have many different types of mescaline come around. So this is what's happening in the uncontrolled age of designer drugs. Another important thing I want to share with you about methamphetamine, and this is what we exclusively have right now, and it started when we tried to control 2P2 and other chemicals that the street was using to make methamphetamine. So the street chemists were only left with finding things like ephedrine, pseudoephedrine, anti-asthma pills, things like that, where they could make methamphetamine out of that. They're even making methamphetamine out of phenylalanine, an amino acid. But one thing that happened out of that is usually when you make methamphetamine in the laboratory using the right materials, it makes a right-hand molecule and a left-hand molecule. The right-hand molecule stimulates the brain, the left-hand molecule stimulates the heart and the lungs and sinuses and stuff like that. Well, basically, when you buy a pharmaceutical company would have both left and right-hand molecules, the right-hand dominates and you get the stimulant effect. However, if you separated these two right and left hand and you only sold the left-hand molecule, you can sell a drug that is not controlled, not abused, it can't be abused because it only stimulates the heart and sinuses. And that's what's in Vicks inhalers. And a lot of inhalers have pure left-handed methamphetamine because it's not going to create a abuse or any other kind of problem. But what happened was when the chemists on the street were only left with Sudafed, left-hand Sudafed, and ephedrine, things like that, it turns out that taking that as a starting reagent and making meth out of it, pure left-handed Sudafed and pure left-handed ephedrine in asthma pills converts to making pure right-handed or that really abusable part of amphetamine, methamphetamine. This methamphetamine, right-handed pure dextro isomer methamphetamine base is 3 to 4 times stronger than methamphetamine and a lot stronger than left-hand methamphetamine. And all we have now in every sample that we're analyzing, it's pure right-hand methamphetamine base, which is much stronger and much more addictive. So we have a tremendous amount of these things happening and a tremendous amount of street drugs going on. And we have a whole history of this and many different, how are clients getting this? They're either making it themselves, but we are on that I-5 corridor. Everybody comes up I-5, taking drugs, big markets, they can sell in Portland, Seattle, places like that. But if they can sell it and make the same profits in Medford, you bet they're going to do it. So we have a lot of bust going on. We have a lot of fentanyl bust going on here. We have a lot of marijuana bust, you know that. And we also have a lot of methamphetamine bust going on. But even if they don't rely on the Mexican cartel smuggling it in that they get from China and other places, you have now street people, I mean, you have basically users who now get off the internet the formulas for making their own methamphetamine. We control Sudafed, but they're using asthma pills, they're using inhalers, they're using other things, and they get a pretty good yield, and they make what they call shake and bake, or their own Nazi meth. Of course, most of the meth, those stills coming illegally, smuggled in from Mexico, from actually created from the Sunni Triangle in China, but then goes to Mexico where they convert it to methamphetamine and it gets in. Cocaine is also different. We're seeing more and more free-base cocaine. It's a different, more potent type of cocaine. So all this is happening. As you know, that basically methamphetamine are CNS stimulants. So they're going to increase your attention, increase wakefulness, decrease appetite, increase heartbeat, and cause all that. One thing that we have seen dangerously in abusers is they sometimes in overdose have hyperthermia. Their body temperature goes up so high, their blood starts to coagulate and they die that way. Long-term effects, methamphetamine is very addicting. Now with the speedballing, with the fentanyl, it's even more addictive. When they take for long periods of times or take high doses, they develop sort of a tweak. We call it a tweak, but it's actual psychosis. Their brain chemical gets so mixed up, they develop paranoia, they develop hallucinations. We actually see deaths of certain key parts of the brain that are important, affect motor skills, mood, things like that you're familiar with. Physical effects, you can review this on your own, but you know what the psychological effects and mental effects of methamphetamine is. One thing maybe I should mention is if you take too much meth or take it for a long period of time, you develop a condition called a meth dance, in which affects your brain that controls your muscle movements, and you get athetoid type, and you get sort of flailing out and uncontrolled muscle movements. And you also get formication, a word I'm kind of careful with, but it comes from formic acid, and it's feeling that you've got bugs crawling all over your body and all over inside your skin. And that's called the meth bugs. The meth dance and meth bugs are classic with methamphetamine abuse. Long-term brain effects is you get all kinds of gray matter, decreases, transporter mechanism closed down, and so you get the brain cognitive behavior skills that are bad. So we can talk about all of that, but I'm coming close to my time, and basically I just want to show you that basically we can see the changes in the brain very quickly. This is cocaine, that just within minutes after cocaine hitting the brain, you get very dramatic effects on the brain. The person is feeling stimulated, and we do these studies that shows that basically cocaine and meth is working through your own chemistry. So when those chemicals are broken down and can't affect your brain anymore, the brain very quickly with cocaine, since it's so short acting, actually becomes less active than it was before you even took the cocaine. And so basically at this point, 30 minutes after the cocaine is worn off, the individual who's experimenting with or using cocaine in their consciousness, they need it just to function, just to feel like they're alive again, and they'll take more and continue to use more. Over the addictive process, this is called the SPECT scan. We see the normal brain activity, doing this activity and this time of day, eating this type of food. Methamphetamine abusers, it's about maybe 4 years of methamphetamine abuse. What you see here are not holes in the brain. Those are brain cells that are there, but they have totally turned off because there's no need for them to be acting. You are putting in a drug that has misrepresented your brain health with catecholamines. So those cells that create catecholamine and work catecholamine, they turn off. They don't need to function. And so it takes time, but these will recover and you'll get back that functioning. But your brain cell is always turning off when it's out of balance. And that's part of the addictive process. We get changes right away on the first dose of cocaine. I have signs and symptoms of behavioral use and environmental signs. Same thing with cocaine history. Just to let you know, we have all this synthetics now that are up there in terms of bath salts and energy foods and basically jewelry cleaner, glass cleaner, all these things that are sold in regular head shops and stores. They are actually, they have sort of a sign that says for, not for abuse or not for human consumption. And that's the giveaway that they're a new kid on the on the beat, and they can be abused. And as soon as we identify what synthetic bath salt, psychoactive bath salt they have in it, the street chemists change it to another bath salt. You can go on forever in creating this. We have a runaway train sold as insect repellents, stain removers, ladybug attractants, a whole bunch of illegal substances. You have other psychostimulants that are out there. We have time flaca, serotonin. A lot more of these are coming out every day as the street chemist has learned how to manipulate their chemical boundaries. Then we have prescription diversion, Ritalin, Concerta, Adderall, a bunch of all of those, and we're not going to talk about that right now. But just to let you know that basically, methamphetamine is an addictive substance. I'm sorry, I included too much here. Just to let you know, there was a news in report come out of West Virginia and other places, and I checked with clients, and basically clients do smoke, believe it or not, wasp toxins, raid insect killers and stuff like that, that has these chemicals in them that react and work like methamphetamine as well. There's many psychostimulants, which are designer or psychedelic type of amphetamine products. I did want to show you, and I guess I was hoping just to jump to it, but I didn't prepare my stuff, is that this is the addictive pathway. And methamphetamine in every drug of addiction will affect this very primitive part of our brain to release that chemical dopamine that activates this area called nucleus accumbens, and that's a hijacking of your survival mechanism. That's why it's so powerful. Human beings have in their human cortex, they have a stop switch that can usually turn off, but that gets interrupted as well. Then you have your opioid peptides that give incentive saliency in that part of the brain to give that extra boost into making this more of an addictive substance. So if we know what the pathway is, National Institute of Drug Abuse illustrates it in this way. We have so much research showing what addiction is. We develop treatment in terms of counseling and educating people. We know what we're doing with that. But one other part of treatment and all the treatment process is we're now doing medication-assisted treatment. And I know that's very controversial, but the ARC is actually supporting a lot of this medication-assisted treatment. We're doing some of it ourselves, in which we realize that for years, the counseling and the education is treating the conscious part of the brain, but addiction starts in the unconscious part of the brain. And so basically, we're now there's more medications in development to treat addiction than any other disease, believe it or not. And those developments are targeted for treating the unconscious brain to interrupt with that survival mechanism hijacking. And SAMHSA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, did very exhaustive studies that show that medication-assisted treatment actually results in tremendous amounts of benefits in terms of treating addiction. We're not abandoning, you need both treating abstinence, promoting abstinence as well as medication-assisted treatment, but they can work complementary to each other. We have many new processes. We can evaluate drugs in mice. We can get a mice addicted to alcohol or methamphetamine, and then we can see if a drug will block it from going back to methamphetamine after we detoxify them by blocking that craving mechanism. For this, there has still no drug has been approved to treat stimulant use disorder, but there are a lot being used in the field right now, unofficially. Things like the antidepressants, we like to use nitrazepine, which is Remeron, which is a noradrenergic serotonin reuptake inhibitor that has helped people decrease their craving and their withdrawal symptoms from methamphetamine. Olanzapine, basically dopaminergic medications. There's many different things being tried, and I certainly like naltrexone, which will block the craving of it. But that's the current treatment of it, as well as evolving trends, vaccines. We have methamphetamine vaccine and cocaine vaccine that's in the works that should have come out a long time ago, but they haven't. Some people believe the future of addiction treatment will be to vaccinate people and children against getting against getting addiction. We are looking at cocaine vaccines and other these, but just to let you know, I'll finish with this, that treatment does work. Treatment compares favorably treating other diseases. This is like cocaine. This is in dormitory at Bethesda, Maryland, National Institute of Drug Abuse. They took cocaine abusers in 10 days, their brain began to start to light up. And the first day they had no activity. Their brain was totally turned off. 10 days, it starts to light up. After 100 days, 3 months, it's back about a third. It should look like that. But the good news is the brain does heal. You do get healing and you do get return to functionality. The bad news is it takes the time. And basically these studies here with methamphetamine shows that it took in these group of people that studied that had about 6 to 8 years of methamphetamine use, it took them to have continued sobriety or continued absence from methamphetamine, good activity, good eating, good health. It took them 24 months or 2 years before their levels of dopamine came back to where it should be for a non-addict. So good news is the brain does heal. The bad news is it takes time to heal. And in between, that's what an addict is struggling with in recovery. The other thing is that after 6 months or 8 months, the person is not sick anymore. They're not as depressed anymore, but they're just not feeling themselves. So it takes time for that to occur. So recovery does occur. Recovery works. That's good news. And I just want to thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry it took a little bit more than I had, but hopefully you got something out of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Inaba. You definitely have so much information to share, and I appreciate all the work you've done around this. Are there any questions that anybody has for our guest today, Dr. Inaba?
Question, and it may not be for all the treatment providers. Is it more difficult for treatment for those with the fentanyl rise than there were just prior heroin? And so is it making it harder for people to act or be successful in treatment?
Yes, in several different ways. Fentanyl is so strong that even the Narcan, they're making supercharged Narcan now to put in the nose and stuff like that because it can't reverse the overdose. And their addiction is much more profound and it's much harder to get off those. So it's created a real challenge. But recovery is possible. Recovery works, and we're still working and getting people enthused with that. They have to really dedicate themselves to being in a clean and sober space and doing everything they can. We don't cure you of addiction. Addiction is a biological process. You're not going to get cured of addiction, but your brain can heal. It can return to functioning, and you can function better than people who aren't addicts, but it takes time, and that time is rigorously getting yourself in a clean and sober situation and paying attention to everything you can so that you don't slip and relapse. Relapse occurs even treating high blood pressure, even treating diabetes and everything else. And we actually have less relapses treating addiction than we have treating high blood pressure, but it's still, you have to pay attention to your treatment at all time, remain in treatment as long as possible to get as healthy as possible.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Inaba. Thank you so much. That was super informative. I really loved how you broke it down. I'm definitely walking away with a more profound understanding of how the addiction process works across those drugs. So what you're saying that we had over 100,000 annual overdose deaths. Is that correct?
108,000 plus overdose deaths in America, not in Jackson County, but in America. That's the largest ever recorded in the history of the United States.
And fentanyl was the main drug behind these overdoses. Is that correct?
Well, fentanyl represented a good portion of them, but basically they also broke down just methamphetamine represented 30,000 of those deaths as well. So it was up there as well. And then we had those psychostimulants I was talking about, and lots of other drugs, and alcohol was increasing as well, and benzodiazepines. But fentanyl is a growing concern because I think the street dealers know that they can get somebody started on fentanyl. They're going to get them addicted quicker, faster, more profound, harder to kick, and they have their best customer. And I think that's what's going on. So as the studies are showing, fentanyl is being spiked in every single drug that the street sells.
So are we looking, is this a domestic drug crisis, or is this international imports? I mean, are we dealing with home meth labs in garages like we were in the 90s, or is this coming in over the border?
Well, primarily it's coming in, I think most of it's coming in over the border and smuggled in, the meth. And there's Chinese laboratories that create the precursors. They make the chemicals that you can make meth with real easily, and that's imported to Mexico. And then the Mexico cartels are making most of the meth that are smuggling into the United States. But saying that, our clients say they can't make a connection, they don't have any money, they're finding on the internet ways of making methamphetamine out of asthma pills, out of decongestants, out of just Sudafeds and things like that, that they're finding different products that they can make it. And it's pretty easy for them to come up with a recipe for it. And they seem to be doing all well. They say the yield is pretty good. So they're able to provide themselves with it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your information.
Thank you.
Denise?
Hi, Dr. Inaba. Thank you for your presentation.
Hi, Denise.
I have a question about the cocaine and meth vaccine. I'm wondering how having the vaccine won't just block addiction, but not use. I don't know if that's making sense. I'm wondering if you may not become addicted, but will that mean people will just use the drug more if they choose to use?
Well, what the vaccine does, it's like the COVID vaccine. Once you're vaccinated, it inactivates, or the drug, cocaine or meth, will not be able to activate that part of your brain where you get excited and you get addicted and things like that. So if it'll block you from getting addicted, if you've never had the drug before, if you take it, nothing's going to happen to you. If you are addicted, it's like taking an antagonist, and we have antagonists now therapy as well. Now, Trexone is an antagonist therapy, meaning it's sort of like a birth control pill for an addict. If you're an opiate addict and you're on naltrexone, you can't, if you use opiates, it won't affect you at all. You won't feel it at all. So you just don't do it. And there are certain people who believe that, they're having problems. It's been in development for over 12 years, much longer than COVID vaccines have been in development. Nothing's been approved at all because it takes a lot of boosters. They're very short acting. They're not totally effective on some of the, especially fentanyl. They'll never get on top of that because they keep coming up with new fentanyls on top of it. Even with heroin, they have specific heroin vaccine, but it doesn't block the morphine or the codeine. And what the body does is take heroin and convert it to morphine and codeine. So until they have all those covered as well, they don't have an effective vaccine.
Okay, thank you for that.
You know what? More so, I'm more worried about what it might do to the people. I'm not an anti-vax or anything, but heroin addicts, anybody who has a biological propensity to become an addict, have differences in their brain cells and their brain chemistry and their brain connections. And I swear, there's several studies. I've done this for years ago, and I've been promoting it that people don't believe me. If you meet medical diagnostic criteria for addiction, you're smarter. You have a higher IQ, you're more sensitive, you're more aware, you have creativity, you have charisma and charm, you have special, we call them special powers that you're born with those powers. And I don't want to disrupt that ability. And if you do recovery, you're not disrupting your inherited ability. You actually are able to use them now that you're not an addict. And that's why recovery is such a wonderful thing for people to be a part of and witness. And we call it a miracle because people become so amazingly talented when they enter sobriety because they're born with inherent talents that they were muffling by their addiction.
That sounds like great information to disseminate as part of a prevention or readiness for change messaging, so people can kind of have addiction destigmatized by not seeing themselves as bad people, but understanding they have these other qualities that make them unique and special. So I'm so glad you said that.
We actually have recovery high schools and recovery universities in Oregon, that cater just to high school kids that are in recovery and come to that one special high school. And that's what they do. They're doing exactly what you say. They sit down with each one coming in and they want to know if they are aware of their superpowers. And if they're not, they're going to find that superpower in them by the time they graduate from high school.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Inaba.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Well, Dr. Inaba, thank you so much for your presentation today. Very much something that we were hoping to hear from, and you certainly delivered. So thank you again for all you do for our community and for being willing to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right.